This is Eureka Grade 6, Module 3, Part 2 of Lesson 7. So yesterday we talked about ordering rational numbers. Rational numbers, again, are positive or negative whole numbers, or fractions and decimals. If they're just talking about positive or negative whole numbers, then we're talking about integers. But today we've been talking about yesterday, the last video, about rational numbers. So we want to make sure we incorporate both decimals as well as fractions. So we're going to begin with Lesson 7, Example 2 today. Henry Janin, and Clark are playing a card game. The object of the game is to finish with the most points. The scores at the end of that game are Henry, -7, Janin, 0, and Clark, -5. So who won the game? Who came in last place? Use a number line model and explain how you arrived at your answer. So we're going to use a vertical number line today, but before we do that, we're going to list out our information. Okay, so our information was that Henry had -7, Janin had 0, and Clark had -5. And when I'm doing that, because I'm working on a number line, I'm writing them just as integers, not necessarily talking about points right now. The next thing we want to do is we want to use a number line to figure this out. So we need to draw a number line. We're going to draw a horizontal number line. So here is our horizontal number line. Looks like we're working with a 0 and some negative numbers. So let's put our 0 here, and let's put our negative numbers on this side. We'll go ahead and write them all out today. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, and -7. Now, in the last video, we worked with just 2 numbers, and now we have 3 to work with. We have to put them in order. So let's start by plotting them on here. Let's give our 0 a nice red line, and our -5, because that's coming next, just give that a blue. And then -7, let's make that one green. Now, if we work with the idea of what we talked about yesterday with left and right, the number to the left would be less. So it looks like at our number line that 0 is our greatest number. And then to the left of 0 would be -5, and to the left of -5 would be -7. So if we were ordering these in order of greatest to least, we'd start with 0, but we actually need to order these from least to greatest. That's what we were doing yesterday. So we want to keep that idea. Least to greatest. So our least would be, in this case, -7, and then the next least would be -5, and then the last least would be, or the greatest, would be 0. Interesting that 0 is considered the greatest in this case. So if I wanted to explain what we just did in words, here's what I would write. Okay, let's see if this isn't too complicated. -7 is the farthest to the left. That means -7 is the smallest or least of the 3 numbers. That was Henry, so sorry Henry, he came in last. Next on the number line is -5, which is to the right of -7, but to the left of 0. So it is greater than -7, but it is less than 0. Therefore, 0 is the greatest, and Janin is the winner. So we answered the question as well as explaining least to greatest in this case, using left and right of numbers. All right, let's move on. For example, exercises 5 through 6. For each problem, order the rational numbers from least to greatest by first reading the problem and then drawing a number line and then explaining our answers. So we're going to continue doing what we've been doing. All right, now we've got Hannon, Janin, and Clark are playing another round of the game. Their scores this time are as follows. Clark has -1, Janin has -2, and Henry -4. So now who won and who came in last place? All right, let's start by listing out our information again. All right, we listed out the information and I drew in our number line. So working with negative numbers. So again, let's put our 0 here, and let's fill in the negative numbers. All right, since we're working with just a few numbers, I went ahead and put them all on the number line. And we have to plot now -1. We'll make -1 the red number. And then -2, we'll make that the blue one. And then -4, we'll make that green. And now we have to determine which one is who won and then who came in last place. So if we were ordering these from least to greatest, again, from least to greatest, we would say the least would be the farthest to the left, and that would be -4. And then the next one would be -2, and then -1 would be the greatest number. If I was putting in least to greatest signs, I would always point it to the smaller number. So I would say -4 is less than -2, but -2 is less than -1. All right, now let's talk about what this means in terms of who won and who came in last place. Okay, so you may not have explained it quite the same way, but if you figured out that Clock won the game and Henry came in last place, then you did it correct. -4 is farthest to the left, and so that means that -4 is the smallest of the three numbers, so that's why Henry lost. He had -4. Next on the number line is -2, which is to the right of -4, but to the left of -2. -1, sorry. Okay, so let's continue that. Next to the number line is -2. Next on the number line is -2, which is to the right of -4, but it's to the left of -1. So it's this way compared to 4, but this way compared to -1. Farthest to the right, however, is -1, which is the greatest of the three negative numbers. So here, Clock won, if you put the numbers next to the name. Sounds complicated, but when we write it out this way, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Okay, number 6. Represent each of the following elevations using first a rational number, and then order the numbers from least to greatest. So we're talking about sea level and below sea level, so if you think about ordering, we want to think about a vertical number line. So let's start by putting in our numbers, our rational numbers, and then put them on draw our number line. All right, I drew the number line first. 122 meters above sea level. What would that integer be? All right, that integer would be 122, positive. The next one is 1,629 meters above sea level. What would that integer be? Now, when we're talking about integers, make sure we're not putting in the measurement. You notice for 122, I didn't put sea level or meters or anything like that. The integer is just the integer, the rational number. In this case, it could also be an integer. So the rational number or integer for 1,629 would be another positive number, 1,629, which is positive. Okay, so our last number is 15 and 24 meters below sea level. What would be the integer without the measurement, just the rational number for 15 and 24 meters below sea level? Negative 15.24. All right, now these are a lot of numbers to put on a number line, so we have to know where they go. We're not going to do all of them. So let's put our 0 in here. It looks like we only have one negative number, so I'm going to put that over here, make our 0 lower. Our negative numbers will be below sea level, so I'm going to put that down here, negative 15.24. And then looking at the positive numbers, the first one is 122 in the positive realm, and the next positive rational number is 1,629. Remember, we can refer to 122 and 1,629 as both rational numbers as well as integers because they are whole numbers. But the negative 15.24 can only be referred to as a rational number because it is a decimal and a fraction, and those are only rational numbers for both positive and negative. All right, that said, let's see if we can order the numbers from least to greatest. All right, the least number would be the number that's below all the others. The farthest below, in this case, would be negative 15.24. So if we're numbering it least to greatest, and sometimes we have to do greatest to least, so be careful. Here's what we're going to write first. The one farthest below, in this case, if we were on a number line, it would be the farthest to the left. But since we're on a vertical number line, if we're on a horizontal one, it would be farthest to the left. Since we're on a vertical, it's the farthest below. And so that one's going to be negative 15.24. And then the next one up, going up, would be 122. And then the next one would be 1,629. If we're putting in our greater than less than signs, we could say that negative 15 and 24 hundredths is less than 122, but 122 is less than 1,629. So now we've ordered the numbers from least to greatest. When we order, we don't usually put in our greater than less than sign. We usually just put in a comma. So I just want to make sure we have that down pat. All right. Now comes the tricky part. Okay, so 15 and 24 hundredths is the farthest below 0, so it is the least. As you move up, the numbers increase. Next on the number line is 122, which is above 0. The greatest number is a number most above 0, which is 1,629, sorry. It is above 122, so it is the greatest. Therefore, the greatest elevation, and notice that I am now putting back the measurement. The greatest elevation is 1,629 meters above sea level. You may not have written those exactly, you may have thought it that way, but it is a nice way of explaining when you're talking about numbers. Okay. Now it's your turn. In the table below, list each set of rational numbers in order from least to greatest. Then list their opposites. Finally, list the opposites in order from least to greatest. So you might want to have a piece of paper with you so that you can make your own number lines. Okay, so the first one says 1/4 and 1/2. If you're drawing 1/4 and 1/2 from least to greatest, sorry, it's 1/4 and negative 1/2. What would come first? So the first one would be negative 1/2. That would be the least, and then the next one would be 1/4. Now if you wanted to write the opposites of these, the opposite of negative 1/2 would be 1/2. And then the opposite of positive 1/4 would be negative 1/4. And now we need to put these in order as well. Negative 1/4 and positive 1/2, which one comes first least? That would be negative 1/4. And then the positive 1/2 would be the greater number in this case. All right, try 2 and negative 10. Order it first from least to greatest. Yeah, the least is negative 10, and then the greatest is positive 2. Now what are the opposites of negative 10 and positive 2? The opposite of negative 10 is 10, and the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. And now how do you order positive 10 and negative 2? Which one is the least? Which one is the greatest? Okay, Next, 0 and positive 3/2. Which one is the least? Which one is the greatest? Zero is the least, and 3 1/2 is the greatest. All right, here's a tricky one. What's the opposite of 0 and the opposite of negative 3 1/2? Whoops, I just gave it to you. The opposite of 0 is 0, because there is no opposite. And the opposite of positive 3 1/2 is negative 3 1/2. So now order these from least to greatest. 0 and negative 3 1/2, saying it correctly. In this case, negative 3 1/2 now becomes the least, and 0 becomes the greatest. All right, let's try the next one. Negative 5 and negative 5 6/10. All right, negative 5 6/10 is to the left of negative 5. And so negative 5 6/10 is the least, and negative 5 is the greatest. Now, what are the opposites of negative 5 6/10 and negative 5? It's 5 6/10 and positive 5. So now taking 5 6/10 and positive 5 6/10 and positive 5, and you order those from least to greatest, what do you have? You now have positive 5 and then 5 6/10. Wonder if you're seeing a pattern here. All right, the next one, 24 1/2 and 24. Which one is least? Which one is greatest? Twenty-four is the least, and then 24 1/2 would be to the right of that. And positive to the right makes it greater. All right, what is the opposite of 24 and the opposite of 24 1/2? Negative 24 and negative 24 1/2. All right, now how do we order negative 24 and negative 24 1/2 on the number line? Negative 24 1/2 is the least in this case, and negative 24 is the greatest. All right, negative 99.9 and negative 100. Where does it fall on the number line? In this case, negative 100 would be to the left of negative 99.9. You would come to negative 99.9 first, and then you would come to negative 100. All right, what is the opposite of negative 100, negative 99.9? It is 99.9. I'm sorry, it is 100 and 99.9 positives. Now, how do you put those in order? Right, the 99.9 goes first, and then the 100 on the positive side. All right, moving right along. 0.05, negative 0.05, and negative 0.5. Now, this one's a little more tricky. This one is a little harder to put on the number line, so I'm going to write them right above. Negative 0.5, and then negative 0.05. If we write those as we say what they are and write them as fractions, we have negative 5/10. And over here we have negative 5/100. Notice that it's in the hundredths place value, not in the tenths. So if we wanted to make them the same, if we would need to do and have another number here, which we learned earlier, we can make that into a 50 by making this into 100. and making that 50 that way. So now if we're looking at it that way, it becomes negative 0.50 or negative 0.05. Well, we knew already that negative 0.5 would be about halfway. I hope we knew that. That's negative 0.5 or 50 in this case, okay? So 50 hundredths and 5 hundredths, which one comes first? If we're going from starting at 0, the 5 hundredths will come first here. So now, which one is less than and which one is greater? Negative 0.5. So 1/2 is actually less because it was to the left of the negative 0.05. That one's probably complicated. But you know this one. The opposite of 5/10 and the opposite of negative 5/10 and the opposite of negative 5 hundredths. Okay, now if you go back to what we did over here and talk about them in terms of positive, which one comes first now? Now it would be the positive 5 hundredths would come before the 5/10 or the halfway. All right, on this next one, you do your number line, negative 7/10 and 0. Which one is the least? Negative 7/10 is less than 0. All right, what is the opposite of negative 7/10 and what is the opposite of 0? I hope I didn't trick you that time. The opposite of negative 7/10 is positive 7/10. And the opposite of 0 is still 0 because it does not have an opposite. And now how do you order least from greatest here? Zero and 7/10. Positive. All right. Last one. 100 and 2 hundredths. And 100 and 4 hundredths. Which one is less? Which one is greatest? .2 hundredths is less than 100.4 hundredths. All right, what are the opposites of these? All right, now put them in order from least to greatest as opposites. Put the opposites in order from least to greatest. Then it is 100, negative 100 and 4 hundredths, and negative 100 and 2 hundredths. All right, now the last one, I want you to look at each row and tell me what pattern hopefully you started to see between this one and this one. Between the numbers in the second and the fourth column, what was the pattern? And see if you can come up with why this is so. Now this is a two-part question, and a lot of times folks only answer the first part. You'll only get half credit if you only answer the first part. Try to come up with why this is so and talk to me about left and right. And that is lesson 7.